I dreamt the human race was designed to add technology was
For me, the most paralyzing news was that nature was no conservationist. It has not only exterminated exquisitely evolved species in a twinkling, but drained oceans and drowned continents as well. If people think nature is their friend, then they sure don't need an enemy.
Devastation in the heart of one of the most densely populated urban areas on Earth.
Most of the dead farmers, fishermen, and their families have been swept out to sea and out of sight.
Looking back, our reports seem, well, rather futile. But at the time, we were convinced they would prove an important record of our work, our efforts to find some solution to nature's surprise attack on the human race.
So 5 o'clock is 5 o'clock and time for our daily report. Dr. Stewart?
Cut it out, Lloyd.
So that's no comment at this stage from Dr. Maxwell Stewart, the grand old man, monoclonal antibody king, Mr. Genetics himself.
So let's close with a weather report. It was light till 4 this morning. That's a full 2 hours longer than last night. And my goodness, there was some spectacular aurora activity. Anyway, then it was night. More or less.
Prepare yourselves! Shut off the gas! Shut off electricity!
Nature is very dangerous because it's uncontrolled. And we have fought nature for so long to avoid being dragged back down into that morass of natural evolution, which we despise. We call it terrible when we look at people starving to death in Somalia. And if that were not, in fact, a politically artificial situation, it's happened often before in a totally natural circumstance. People outrun their land, they starve to death, but we don't accept that anymore. We do not accept the rule of nature at all.
Highly organized destruction was in progress, a battle without generals waged for uncounted thousands of years. Cat-like creatures, such as Gren had seen in the termite's nest, bounded past and swarmed up the trees to get to the attack. Everything that could move did so, prodded on by hunger.
A lot of my fiction is not high-tech. It doesn't feature the city so much. It's about nature, with which I think I have a close, if involved, relationship. I suppose part of this was going to the Far East at an early age and encountering jungle and forest. One of my early novels, Hothouse, was based on precisely that experience, the sense of the speeded up growth of nature and the tropics as something that could literally devour you.
He stepped through a tree whose trunk had contorted itself into a loop. As he did so, the loop snapped together. Gren escaped constriction by the skin of his teeth and lost the skin of his legs.
the bottom of our garden, we're fortunate in having a little copse, which in its way is a kind of tame forest. And it's very pleasant to be there. But I sometimes think, as I stand there, that the trees represent friendly presences. But if you stood there long enough, they grow through you. There's no compunction in a tree.
These trees are the tallest in the world. A tree like this has stood more than 2,000 years. This tree is older than Christianity, son.
Gee.
Makes you feel kind of small, doesn't it? To think that trees like these have stood here since long before man came on earth.
It makes you feel like a church does, almost.
It can be very frightening to be out in the middle of the country late at night, or not even late at night, just in the dark by yourself and not know where you are. And there's all the difference in the world from walking a path that's already been marked out for you and being by yourself, which is kind of healing and invigorating, and actually being lost and not knowing if you walk, if you're going to be walking for 3 days or for 3 hours or for 3 minutes before you're found again.
Nothing peaceful, nothing ordinary, not here, not now, not this. She kept her eyes tight shut and clenched her hands, struggling. Her heart pounded hard and there was something buzzing inside her, something that might have been fear.
Diary extract, March 20th, 1999. The weather is proving increasingly unpredictable, and we have not seen daylight for this last month. Sometimes I wonder if this is nature's revenge on us for having lost touch with the natural world, for our arrogance in thinking we could be above the laws of nature. Now it's too late to return and mend the bonds as we enter the final phase. All we can do now is remember with a faint and fond nostalgia the planet we used to inhabit.
From the dramatic sweep of the Grand Canyon to the quiet majesty of the Canadian Rockies, here is a wonderland of nature, unsurpassed anywhere in the world.
I think when people start fantasizing about nature and how wonderful it is and seeing it as a kind of escape, it's a sign of the end, or that the end is already here, really. They're fantasizing not about something that can be regained. It's a kind of dream of something that never really was. It's a golden age in the past.
I think one of the things that's important to realize now is that nature is increasingly an abstraction to human beings. To the extent that they have any experience of it at all, it is on television screens. You know, they don't. For example, in this country, large numbers of people are injured in the American national parks when, for example, parents tell their children to go stand by the buffalo and have a picture taken. There's no sense at all of a wild animal. There's no sense at all of this kind of unpredictability. Everything is on display, everything is a show, and everything is safe.
Let's listen to the land we all love. Nature's plan will shine above. Listen to the land, listen to the land. When springtime comes, how can you tell?
I feel that, you know, within 50 years, the only natural terrain that exists will be that artificially maintained. I mean, people will visit the Amazon in the same spirit that they visit Disneyland. It'll be an artificial Amazon with color-coordinated nature trails, and you'll be able to buy a piece of jungle vine to take home with you. I think people prefer an artificial environment, and most people don't really want to go back to nature, where life is, on the whole, rather sort of tough and unobliging.
This time of year, behind the buzzing of the bees, you can almost hear the bursting of the blossom. They're not quite so loud as the language of the farmers about the hazards of late frosts. But frost can never threaten the garden of Mr. Charles Walder. He's planted his entire garden with plastic flowers. Mr. Walder of Tadley in Hampshire has achieved the ultimate in labor-saving horticulture. Flowers that remain in bloom perpetually.
Our true environment is asphalt, macadam, concrete. It's the landscape of advertisement hoardings and of concrete high-rises that we feel most at home in, if we're honest with ourselves.
The ancient Romans were road builders too, but they had slaves to do the work. Today we push our roads just where we want them to go. Now the strength in a man's back or in his arms is not important. It's the strength he controls at his fingertips that counts.
Well, he has become nature with bulldozers and with dynamite. You know, we were going to build artificial harbors with atom bombs. Do you know that? Up in the Eskimo territory, we were going to give them ports that really big ships could come in by setting off bombs. Yeah, I was saying man's arrogant about what he can do to the planet. It's like saying Mozart's arrogant about what he can do on a piano. You know, he can really do it.
After the Tuttle incident, Father got so interested in turtles that he stopped working on the atom bomb. Do you know the story about Father on the day they first tested a bomb out at Alamogordo? After the thing went off, after it was a sure thing that America could wipe out a city with just one bomb, a scientist turned to Father and said, "Science has now known sin." And you know what Father said? He said, "What is sin?"
Man, with his knowledge of chemistry, also can change nature's basic building materials into new and useful products.
Today, with petroleum, a farmer can fight the odds of nature instead of giving in to them.
Raid's here! Raid! 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 Raid!
Yes, Raid. New bug killer discovery from Johnson's Wax. Sweeps bugs from the air. Attacks them as they crawl. And kills them dead.
When I started science in my 20s, it was a wonderfully innocent world. It was open and full, and the future seemed boundless. We were going to discover more and more exciting things. One read science fiction, I think, a lot in those days because it sort of opened up the possibilities for the future.
If these monsters got started as a result of the first atomic bomb in 1945, what about all the others that have been exploded since then?
I don't know.
Nobody knows, Robert. When man entered the atomic age, he opened a door into a new world. What we'll eventually find in that new world, nobody can predict.
I think in the immediate post-war period, say the 50s and early 60s, the time when I began writing science fiction, people had almost no awareness, as far as I can remember, of sort of ecological topics. When The Drowned World was published, it was regarded as a fantasy. Nobody believed that global warming could occur, that the average temperature of the planet could rise by 1 or 2 degrees. Nobody believed that the huge advances in science and technology that had taken place in the 1940s and 50s would have to be paid for.
Covering the offshore waters of the world's oceans to a distance of about 1,000 miles from the coast was a thin but resilient monomolecular film formed from the vast quantities of industrial wastes discharged into the ocean basins during the previous 50 years. This tough, oxygen-permeable membrane lay on the air-water interface and prevented almost all evaporation of surface water into the airspace above. The sea had constructed a skin no thicker than a few atoms, but sufficiently strong to devastate the lands it once irrigated.
The business of a science fiction writer is to go where speculation is currently fiercest. In the interwar period, 20s, 30s, even the 1940s, the big questions were things like, can we release nuclear power? Can we send a rocket to the moon? Well, we've done those things. And the big question that remains is, if we are so clever, why aren't we smart?
CO2, aircraft exhaust, medium fallout, rain-making compounds, smoke, sulfur dioxide, lead alcohol. The rain was sour. He stopped dead, not believing what his senses reported. Christ, he said aloud, and a shaft of terror went down his spine like an icicle. Battery acid. There was no doubt about it. He'd owned an electric car long enough to be certain. Raining acid. He screamed and ran headlong for the house. Industrial effluents, detergents, selenium and cadmium from mine tailings, fumes from garbage incinerators, burning plastic.
I suppose the sheep lookup actually arose from a trend that was becoming quite widespread in science fiction around the end of the 60s, beginning of the 70s. We were no longer able to believe naively in our glorious future among the stars because it was becoming patently obvious that we are fouling our own nest to a very great extent. There were the major ecological disasters beginning to break. I had not very long before been to Denver, Colorado, and I'd seen a river that had been officially declared a fire hazard. And it was from bits and snippets and news stories and so forth that I began to assemble a background which really scared me. I must admit, it scared me.
Well sludge, fly ash, asbestos, polyethylene, polystyrene, polyurethane, glass, cans, nylon, dactyl.
No, baby, no. Makes you think the God's up there looking down going, I gave you a nice planet and you fucked it up. Everything's going a little strange. Our rivers are so polluted that maybe one day a 5,000-pound trout's gonna crawl out of the Hudson and go, I won't talk to anybody from Dow Chemical, anybody. Get his ass over here. I got some two-headed babies to show your ass.
The next autumn, a second generation of even larger birds appeared. These immense creatures with bodies as broad and powerful as a man's flew out of the storms along the coast, attacking the farmers and their families. Driven by hunger, they began to attack the human beings who were their only source of food. Discovery is always a rape of the natural world. Always. The scientists want it that way. They have to stick their instruments in. They have to leave their mark. They can't just watch. They can't just appreciate. They can't just fit into the natural order. They have to make something unnatural happen. That is the scientist's job.
The notion that we are arriving at the end of the scientific era seems to me something that I notice is increasingly widely held. What I mean by that is that we have had, for over a century, the notion that science is value-free, the notion that science is in some sense antithetical to religious or spiritual values, the notion that science operates according to its own rules, and that if I, as a scientist, don't do some research, someone else will, so I might as well go forward. The notion that the great quest will eventually lead to understanding the universe, that is possible and that will happen. Increasingly, I think all of that is suspect.
Earth, a biosphere, a complex, subtly balanced life support system. We don't know as much as we should about the ability of the atmosphere to cleanse itself, but we suspect that photochemical processes triggered by pollution could cause the atmosphere to change so that life would be threatened everywhere.
Diary extract, June 15th. At 3:15 a.m., I was woken by the alarms to find all the rabbits dead in their cages. I have no rational explanation for why this has happened. I now realize that so many of the scientific principles I was taught cannot explain the chaotic and unpredictable patterns of nature.
Gaia became visible through the new knowledge about the Earth gained from space. Gaia is the Earth seen as a single physiological system, an entity that is alive, at least to the extent that, like other living organisms, its chemistry and temperature are self-regulated at a state favorable for life.
In the system that is the Earth, man cannot possibly survive as he is now. We are subject to evolution, just as every other animal or plant is, every other organism, I should say. The interesting thing is, the rules of Gaia are quite simple, and they're strangely like the old Greek goddess. She was kindly, feminine, nurturing, and looked after everybody, but if you transgressed, you were zapped, but good. So the message is very clear for humans. We've got to live right with the Earth, or we go. The Earth goes on, but we go.
Imagine a planet where nothing could grow. All production of ozone-destroying chemicals must stop now if we are to protect the life of this planet. Given time, the ozone layer can heal itself. Either way, the clock is running.
Faster than previously thought, government scientists.
Evidence from a survey by America's space agency, NASA.
Why worry anyway, said the optimists. A warmer world might be a nicer place to live in. And devotees of the burgeoning Gaia cult took comfort in their view of the benevolent Earth Mother, working for the good of all to maintain conditions suitable for life on Earth. They ignored, if they were ever aware of, the remark once made by Jim Lovelock, father of the Gaia hypothesis. Gaia, he'd said in a video interview, isn't out to protect mankind. She's out to protect herself.
They thought that I was putting forward the idea of some sentient Earth being, the old original Mother Earth, who consciously interfered with the laws of nature and manipulated physics and chemistry and so on, so as to keep things right for life. Well, this is absurd. Nothing was further from my mind, and I'm disgusted that they thought that that is what I thought.
The varieties of eco-mysticism are legion. Besides the Geists, Earth worshippers, the Universalists, cosmos worshippers, and the friends and foes of bioengineering, there are Neoplatonic, phenomenological, reincarnationist, and charismatic ecomystics, syndicalist, communist, tribalist, and gerontocratic ecomystics, and many, many others.
I saw that every living thing has its own special luminous quality. I wanted to explore the secret of that magical feeling. I felt a yearning to understand it.
I think one of the forms of contemporary egotism is the notion that that we have the ability to destroy the planet, and that people run around with T-shirts and stickers that say, "Save the planet," as if you could. As if you could, in the first place, destroy it, and as if you could, in the second instance, save it. This 4.5 billion-year-old thing with its hot radioactive core, its very thin crust of tectonic plates, its very thin crust of living things, and its very, very thin layer of atmosphere. Certainly it's fragile, but it has gone a long time without us, and it will go on a long time after we're gone. It couldn't care less.
Things have always been happening on this planet. Comets and asteroids come plunging in and do devastating damage, far greater than the letting off of all the atom bombs, by orders of magnitude greater. I often wonder, for example, if there were a volcano as powerful as Tambora that went off about 1811, I think, to happen now, what would happen? You see, Tambora threw enough junk into the stratosphere to cause a complete cessation of harvests in the whole of the northern hemisphere for about 2 years. Now, they could sustain it then because there was only a few million people around. Now, what would happen if there were no harvests at all with our numbers of people? And these things can happen, anything can happen. We don't know when they're going to happen.
Is it running?
I don't know. How can you tell?
Is the red light on?
Oh, yes. Yeah, okay, we're rolling. Diary extract, August 12, 1999. As weather conditions deteriorate rapidly, we are racing to avert a human catastrophe. We have made spectacular advances in our genetic biotech research. The temptation to develop a superhuman race is irresistible. Now, the climate seems to be moving into rapid and unpredictable change. We think it'll make the Ice Age look like a tea party. But now we have a science far enough advanced to combat any threat of extinction. This science is genetics. Of course, left to her own devices, Mother Nature will probably come up with some kind of solution if we don't all die out in the interim. But we're working to speed up the process by the fusion of human cells with other fast-breeding and intelligent cells to produce a polymorphous hybridoma.
Every bud will grow into a perfectly formed embryo, and every embryo into a full-sized adult, making 96 human beings grow where only one grew before. Progress. The voice was almost tremulous with enthusiasm. The principle of mass production at last applied to biology.
People find the new physics and the new biology nightmarish because it implies change, it demands change, and it offers choices. And these are choices people don't want to make. If you consider the choice of having your child be completely free of all disease or being completely natural, which would you choose? I think very few people in the long run would opt to have completely natural children. But that leads to the possibility of designer children, where you choose not just their health, but their body shape, their mental capabilities. You even go for designer children with different shaped bodies, or perhaps if you're not satisfied with your body, you can change it.
Over the decades to come, we're going to create the next revolution after the Industrial Revolution, and we're going to learn to design our own drugs. We're going to learn to build with molecular machinery the things that create the world around us tomorrow in ways that we don't yet begin to imagine.
96 identical twins working 96 identical machines. Standard men and women in uniform batches.
you could create hybrids of you could, for instance, zap apes genetically, give them a little something extra that might come from human genetic material so that they would be good servants. Now, many people would think that that's automatically a very bad thing. As a writer, as a science fiction writer, I think it's an interesting thing. And I want to imagine that world. Fortunately, I won't have to live in it. Although I don't know. I mean, it might be nice to have an ape servant who was a little like your younger brother.
There may be a chance, of course, that we can preserve the pandas by preserving their genetic structure. And perhaps it might be possible to breed very small pandas, little tabletop pandas, which could live quite happily on, of course, a far smaller diet of bamboo leaves, so that perhaps in future many of the animals which are now threatened with extinction, the beautiful tigers, leopards, etc., could be kept in miniature zoos by a process of genetic manipulation.
Just the information that is available to us through genetics, the possibilities, have repercussions on religious ideas that we've inherited from 2,000 years ago. For instance, the nature of Christ, he's both divine and human. As a human being, that means he has a human genes, genetic structure, DNA. One might even find a trace of his DNA on a relic of the cross, a tiny little microscopic bit of blood. And from that, determine what Christ's genetic structure was and duplicate it. If you had a sacred relic, you could clone Christ.
I've been trying to duplicate nature's work in the test tube. It just can't be done.
There must be some answer to it, Doctor.
There is. I must let nature do this work for me in the body of a normal person, like you. Or Paul.
My greatest concern is that the people who are doing this work have access to very fundamental technologies, and they do not have a similarly fundamental knowledge of the world into which their discoveries, inventions, and changes will be introduced. It is one thing to say, I'm a farmer breeding pigs for 100 generations. That's fine. That's a very low order, and in fact, very detached way to monkey with genetics. Perhaps we shouldn't say monkey, but it's quite different to be able to look at the DNA strands, to be able to see the order of the base pairs, and to be able to insert and extract genes. That's a very, very different thing. It's more different probably than the difference between gunpowder and nuclear explosives.
From a mine in South America came a piece of amber containing the fossilized remains of a prehistoric mosquito, one of many that had fed upon the blood of dinosaurs. From the DNA in that blood, science was able to recreate those giants, and for the first time, man and dinosaur shared the earth.
Oh, I loved Jurassic Park. I thought it was a splendid read, a novel. It had the quality of all good science fiction. Part of it was so near the truth that I was delighted to read, I think it was in either Nature or Science, several months was it, or maybe it was years after its publication, an article about finding DNA in the insects trapped in amber, which of course was part of the theme of the way that the dinosaurs were reconstructed in the story. And somebody had actually reduced to practice the suggestions that were at that time classed as science fiction.
It's not an ordinary zoo, Dodgson said. This zoo is unique in the world. It seems that InGen has done something quite extraordinary. They have managed to clone extinct animals from the past. What animals? Animals that hatch from eggs and that require a lot of room in a zoo. What animals? Dinosaurs, Dodgson said. They're cloning dinosaurs.
One of the major fears about genetic engineering does touch on a profound fear of knowledge. It does tend to touch on reproduction and therefore begin to touch on themes that get very close to parts of the individual that they are very often very worried about. And like the myth of Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden, the primeval scene, our parents' sex lives, all of these things are very, very fraught. And they can all be fraught with attitudes about knowledge. And sometimes it's played into on the part of the geneticist to say, I'm doing something fantastically important. It's dangerous, and therefore it's important. And stop me before I play God. These are just wild illusions. Generally, our knowledge is not of that kind.
Think of it. The brain of a dead man, waiting to live again in a body I made with my own hands. With my own hands.
Diary extract, January the 14th, year 2000. The experimental recombinant designs we are developing will directly affect human evolution. There are considerable risks involved. Diary extract, February the 27th. An accidental spillage of the preferred culture amazed us by being able to metastasize on its own. Diary extract, March 2nd. Can we really know what evolutionary progress will mean for us? What if Mother Nature has new designs, and we're already dead twigs on the evolutionary tree, waiting for the storm to blow us away?
Of course, there's no guarantee that human evolution will, go forever onward and upward. In a short story of mine called The Voices of Time, I visualize a world in the very near future where the human race realizes that it's effectively run its course.
It's simply a matter of biochemistry. The ribonucleic acid templates are wearing out. The dyes inscribing the protoplasmic signature have become blunted. After all, they've been running now for over 1,000 million years. It's time to retool. It's always been assumed that the evolutionary slope reaches forever upwards, but in fact, the peak has already been reached, and the pathway now leads downwards to the common biological grave. We won't be star men, but Neanderthal chimp people.
This may already be happening, of course. I mean, the pressures on the human population at present, as a result of the pollution of the atmosphere, pollution of the food we eat and the water we drink, is so great that one assumes that all sorts of selection machinery is already in train.
I think we're a failed species, and perhaps in the laboratories we can start experimenting with hopeful monsters, but I don't want them to be even smarter. I don't want them to be even bigger. And as I've said again and again, it's our wanting to become smarter to solve our problems is like an elephant saying, and the elephants are in trouble now, if we can put on a couple of 100 more pounds, we'll be okay. And
As for humans making a comeback, starting to use tools and build houses and so on, they would have to do it with their beaks this time. Their arms have become flippers. Each flipper is studded with 5 purely ornamental nubbins, attractive to members of the opposite sex at mating time. Those parts of people's brains which used to control their hands simply don't exist anymore, and human skulls are now much more streamlined on that account. The more streamlined the skull, the more successful the fisher person.
I'm willing to accept it. We're here to serve God in some way. And a very nice way to do it, I think, would be to be a fur seal. You know, we would do very little that was offensive. We do terribly offensive things now. I mean, violent things is gratuitous murder and waste. And so I would welcome that.
I don't see us as by any means the last possible intelligent organism on this planet, or even possibly the most intelligent even now. I worry a lot about the brains of the large whales, some of which have brains something like 10 times as large as ours, and there's no reason whatever to suppose that those brains are not used.
When the effect came, it was almost unnoticed, because it happened to such a small and insignificant form of life. Ordinary ants of different species were doing things ants don't do. Meeting, communicating, apparently making decisions. By summer, the rest of the world had moved on to other things. But Hubs kept making notes while the threat grew.
We see ourselves as especially important. Some of the more romantic creatures that are endowed with fur and feathers we value and try and prevent their extinction. As we move down through the insects and other littler things, we care less, and by the time we got down to the viruses, we can celebrate the impending destruction of the last few strains of smallpox kept in 2 sites on the surface of the Earth.
Fascinated, they went from gallery to gallery, peering through optical instruments. In the virus hall, they found some viruses now grown on tissue cultures, which caused the diseases that once infested man. First came the general infectious diseases, such as yellow fever, smallpox, measles, and similar strains. They were followed by the viruses, the influenzas, the para-influenzas, adenoviruses, and enteroviruses.
In my early days as a writer, I wrote a short story called Gene Hive. And basically, it's, I suppose, what was later known as the selfish gene. That is to say, I viewed the human being as a colony of genes whose interests were not necessarily coincident with the individual himself, and so that there might be a time when those genes were sufficiently strong and intelligent for the cells to lead an independent life and not to need to live in a colony, so that human beings would disintegrate, so that eventually all that is left is to say, well, we were human and we had our day and it was not inglorious. What should we do now? Well, we'll have a glass of wine and wait for the end in dignity.
Genes build themselves into cells, and cells into the gene hive called man, in order to develop their potentialities, not man's. The idea of man's being able to develop was purely an anthropomorphic concept. Now the cells have finished with this shape called man. They have exhausted its possibilities and are going on to something else.
When I was clearing up that spillage, I'd swear bits of it were hiding from me. No. God, if our work is a success, if the cells in that dish can think, who's to say they won't have plans of their own?
Lois.
What if we're not in them?
Don't do this. Don't go mystico-paranoid on me. Not now. That computer thinks. These cells think. But we're the ones in control. That's the whole point.
His world is suddenly filled with action and simplicity. There is no light, but there is sound. It fills him in great sluggish waves, not heard but felt through his 100 cells. The cells pulse, separate, contract according to the rush of fluid. This is now the basis of his being, the flow. He is in his own blood.
Evolution in blood music is technologically based. In other words, we are forcing ourselves to evolve. We start the process. Nature, it turns out in the middle of the book, nature has had a hand in this and is kind of guiding us. And in this case, it's the revolution of the very small.
The sort of unlikely donné in blood music is this idea of thinking cells. Cells, that is, I think, with an artificial basis, which the absconding researcher injects into his own body, and which then take over his body and proliferate and escape into the world outside the laboratory. And of course, this plays very neatly onto all the fears we have of all the dreadful things that are going to escape from laboratories and have been escaping ever since Frankenstein's day. Perhaps one day they'll get us. In blood music, of course, they do get us. And what I think is genuinely poetic about the novel is the fact that no one stops the process. And eventually it transforms everything, including the cities and the whole landscape and the entire world. It's a magical vision.
In just 8 weeks, 2 short months, the entire North American continent has undergone a virtually indescribable transformation. All familiar landmarks, entire cities, have vanished beneath or perhaps been transformed into a landscape of biological nightmare. How can I begin to describe what lies beneath us? A new vocabulary, a new language may be necessary. Textures and forms hitherto unknown to biologists, to geologists, cover the cities and suburbs, even the wilderness of North America. Entire forests.
The plague in blood music, the intelligent plague in blood music, can't be described as beneficial from most people's point of view because it changes their lives outside of their control. It is the tyranny of evolution. It is the downside of existing in nature. It's being forced to grow up. And when you do grow up in blood music, the whole human race changes. And in a sense loses control, but gains choices, which is an interesting parallel in the book, that at the same time that you lose control of your body shape, that you're turned into the equivalent of lime jello, that you don't lose your consciousness.
In Gaia, the most important organisms are the microorganisms, the bacteria, the simple things. Remember, they ran the Earth, they ran the whole system for 2 billion years, and it's only in the last third of the Earth's life that multicellular organisms, plants and animals and things have appeared. And I see those as very much the froth on the top of the glass of beer. The real substance of it is in the microorganisms. And they will easily manage the planet long after we are gone and do it as well as they did it all of those billions of years before we appeared.
No, we've got to get all this stuff on tape. Even if we don't understand what's going on, we might save someone else making the same mistakes.
No, I disagree. We're in no position to make any kind of statement about our findings at this present moment.
I can't believe I'm hearing this. We succeeded in producing the hybridine. It in turn is producing the monoclonal antibodies we need. But it has shown an ability to metastasize itself into recombinant forms that can survive independently. There's no reason to think they'll confine themselves to this laboratory. And also no reason to think that whatever it is they're doing, they won't get smarter at it. In short, it looks like Mother Nature has done us out of a job. And I mean all of us.
There's a kind of moral to this story, which is that really there's no escaping from nature because we are ourselves part of nature. We are not apart from it. Those who live in cities may think so, but we're a part of nature, and this is why we are given 70 years and 10. We're seasonal creatures, like the crocus.
Next week, Without Walls explores the new nightmare of aliens, from other people to other races and even other worlds. Authors Martin Amis, J.G. Ballard and Don DeLillo examine the imaginary and terrifyingly real concept of them.